Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sketchwave, our weekly show where we talk all things digital art because we are both digital artists here on the platform, primarily in the Procreate space. My name is Joel, otherwise known as JoelCreate here on YouTube, and my co-host is the one and only James Julier. James, how has your week been, my friend?
It's been very good, yeah. I've been enjoying the sunshine. It's been nice weather pretty much for the most of the UK, and our audience is
It,
probably not mainly British, but for once we've been enjoying a bit of sun too, haven't we? Which has been lovely. So, how about you?
yeah, it's probably a bit too hot if I'm honest. Yeah, walking the dogs, you
No.
start to get a bit panicky, but no, I love it. I'm a sun worshipper, so I'm always out, and the missus was always hiding under shade somewhere. So I absolutely love it. But
You have to
yeah,
take advantage in this country, don't you? Because we don't get it as much as other places, and when it comes out, the sun, you have to get out and enjoy it, don't you, while you can.
yeah, and
Don't
I
miss
love it,
that
especially
opportunity.
where I live in the south, like by the sea. Like when the sun's out, you start to look at everything locally to you and go, "Do you know what? This place is lovely." But like in the winter, I hate it here.
Well,
It's so
you're in the
grey.
south of the UK, and you do actually get better weather than me. I'm
Yeah.
up in Yorkshire, so it's a bit more grim. But there you go.
Some of my family's from Yorkshire as well, so when we have to go up there, I come back and I'm like, yeah, no, I love this place.
Don't blame
Awesome.
you.
Well, one of our topics that we're going to talk about today is a really important one, and we're going to be talking about creative block and a couple of factors involved in it. And also how to overcome it as well. It's quite a large topic. There's multiple sections to it, isn't there, James? That we can
Hmm.
talk about.
Sure.
I think we should just get the ball rolling by sort of. I think the first thing you have to do when you get in that creative block is just asking yourself a lot of sort of self questions of why have I hit this? So are you pumping out like design after design after design, and you've been doing too much work maybe? Are you potentially consuming too much of content online? I would say is another factor, because then you get kind of comparison kind of creative block, if that makes sense. Like you're struggling to go back to your own ideas. James, what other factors do you think sort of lead into creative block?
I think that you can get creative block at any point in your art career. I think, and for us, there's even YouTubers who come up with tutorials. We can get creative block in terms of creating content for our channels. But I certainly remember, in my youth, or it makes me sound very old, but in various points in my life, I remember it being an issue, more or less at different times, but certainly at times when you know that you just want to be creative and you just can't quite channel it into something that you actually feel fulfilled by. And just getting started, I think, when you're experiencing creative blocks, that it seems to be a really big hurdle to overcome to just get started.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have to look at your week as a whole. For example, like the week leading
Hmm.
up to this moment that you've just hit that block. For me, going back to what you were saying and like what we do on like YouTube, for us, I feel like, well, I'll speak for myself and you can see if you agree. But for me, what we do is really intense. It's there's deliverables that we have to hit every week. We can't just step away for 2 to 3 weeks, if not longer, and just think, oh, I'm really done, like I'm burnt out. I'm. It's a full time job for me, but this isn't full time for me as it is you as well. So there's other pressures externally that says I have to get beyond this. Like you have to get content out there. It's your job, it's your livelihood, it's your mortgage, and so on. And I think for us, as I said, it's really intense. If I think about
Hmm.
it like that, you have to overcome it very quickly. And I've come up with a little bit of a routine, typically, of like understanding factors that have happened and then how to overcome it. For me, a lot of the factors are typically along the lines of, and these might sound very sort of obvious, but they do make a difference to me anyway. Is did I sleep? Have I been sleeping well? Because if you're feeling drowsy and tired, your mind is not at full capacity. If you're already going into the day drowsy, it can be hard to be efficient in any work, let alone creative work as well. So something along those lines, have I been sleeping well? Something like that. I think it's also really important to take care of your body and fuel your body correctly. again, these are the measures I always look at for me. If I'm starting to feel a bit, again, drowsy potentially, or just, a bit lethargic maybe, which is probably a very good word to relate to this topic, very lethargic. I'll say, like, uh, uh, have I eaten enough today? Do I need to go eat something else? Do I need to fuel my body so that it fuels my mind? And by fueling my mind, your creativity has that energy. I think, as much as that is a very simple thing to say, it's so obviously a factor a lot of the time. Are you even dehydrated? Real basic core values to your day, I feel really can
caffeine
lead
for
up to
me.
that.
Yeah.
So what, does caffeine block it for
It's
you,
a
or
big
does
thing.
caffeine like get you going?
Yeah, I think I need in every day. I need some caffeine to get me going. I think
Yeah.
it helps me focus. I think it really does help me just channel my energies and focus on things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, for me,
I
like
have
I can't
ADHD.
get going until the coffee starts going. Like, that's how my day always works. The start of the day is a
Yeah,
coffee very quickly, and then another one midday, and that's it. I don't want to sound too
yeah.
old, but if I have one too late, I'm not going to sleep, and then I end up in the
Mm.
cycle. So it's little factors like that, even knowing, like, no, I can't have a coffee too late because it affects tomorrow. I know that's so simple and
Yeah.
so just basics, but that's a factor for me, most definitely. And like you say, caffeine. If you are somebody who drinks tea or coffee, have you had one? Do you need to take 10
Mm.
minutes out? Um, for me, another thing that I typically sort of think about, like when it comes to sort of creativity as a whole, is, again, how much content have you been making? And have you taken a look at content that would inspire you, like photography? Or have you
Mm.
seen any sort of new style that you really want to go down, that really gets you going and gives you that energy and you get locked in on it?
Jumping back to what you were saying in terms of looking at fresh inspirations, perhaps that can be useful, certainly. And when it comes to creating the tutorials, for example, and that's my current kind of creative block, if I have any, it tends to be centered around the YouTube stuff. Then, yeah, looking at other materials that are out there might just kickstart my imagination a little bit, and that can be very useful. But I also think that it can be something of a barrier to actually feeling like you can get started sometimes when you overly look at other people's work, and it becomes just a comparison, and you beat yourself up because you feel
mm,
like you're not hitting the same standards. I think there comes a point where, sure, it's good to absorb other people's work and take inspiration from that, but it's also good just to quiet your mind and just give yourself the space in order to just, it's like the calm waters become clearer, don't they? It's that whole kind of analogy where if you have turbulent waters and you've got too many thoughts and too many things buzzing around your head, it's hard to focus on anything particular.
mm,
Whereas if you just create a bit of calm, a bit of quiet in your daily routine, I think that you're allowing ideas to kind of bubble up and materialize in your imagination a bit more. And I've always found that particularly useful. I think that the inspirations that you've had in your life, I think, are plenty. Usually, if you're a creative mind, you're not short of things that have inspired you in your life too. And I think that sometimes just to give yourself a moment where you can allow those just to sort of come forward in your mind a little bit is quite
mm.
useful. So for
Yeah.
me, I think that if I'm going to be creative, I have to create the space in order to be creative. Um, and that's usually the mental space, but it's not only that. I think that if you've got a lot of clutter, I mean, I'm quite a cluttered person the way I live anyway, but I think having a little bit of just whatever calm is for you, and it could be music, and it could be just, solitude, or it could just be a tidy room, or whatever it is, creating that space where you can just begin to let your imagination sort of eke out of that murkiness a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, you touched on music there. My typical go-to every time this scenario happens, that is usually the one thing that allows me to lock back in. I'll
Mm.
also, we said there about looking at other people's work. My process typically then is to go really, really simple. Go back, like, you're looking at finished products by other people that have spent hours crafting
Sure.
potentially. Keep it simple. Go back to something really basic, really simple. I like to always do a lot of sort of loose painting styles. and I love just chucking color in, and I mean being really like almost aggressive with the application of paint and just
Mm.
chucking stuff in, because if in that way of being careless and free, something might really spark in you while you're doing it. So for me, that is always a process of when I see that inspiration is just simplifying it, really, really
Yeah.
simplify it back down to basic values. But you said about music, for me, that is my cure
Mm.
a lot of the time. I will sit in here, I will just put my music on fairly loud, as loud as I can without, disrupting the rest of the house. And it just allows me to just tune everything else out, and I can just lock in. And it doesn't matter what type of music it is. For me, some people might prefer like those lo-fi kind of vibes to the music, and where it's
Mm.
very chill, and maybe that's what, helps you. For me, when you're trying to simplify and keep things easy and lock in, for me, some EDM or like dance music really helps me lock in. Just like
Yeah,
it's a
fair
vibe,
enough.
it's that euphoric kind of music that just gets you pumped, and then that helps me just really. We've got notes written down of it, of getting into flow state.
Mm.
What's typically then your, as I mentioned, like what's your cure other than sort of having a clear space? Is there any other parts in the process for you?
I'm just looking at the definition of flow state for anyone that perhaps who might not be familiar with the term. I think a lot of artists will be, but I'm just going to read it verbatim as I googled it. So it describes a mental state in which a person is completely focused on a single task or activity. They are directing all of their attention towards the task, and they do not experience many thoughts about themselves or their performance. And some people refer to this informally as being in the zone. And I do think that music does allow me to do that. I think that it shuts off the internal dialogue a little bit more, and it doesn't shut down your thinking process. But I think that it gives you something to fill that void, that's a positive. I think it creates the tone, like you say. Absolutely. I mean, I've got ADHD for myself, so my mind is pretty cluttered a lot of the time. Whereas having music, just it gets rid of a lot of that internal buzz and chaos, and it allows me to just focus on that thing and the task that I'm doing. So I find it really, really useful for me. Um, and I think for a lot of creative people, I think that it's hard to separate the two. I think the visual and the sound kind of creativity, I think that I have very vivid memories of first venturing into creative things and having music playing in the background. It's been an integral part of my journey. And like you say, it's not always it is now, actually, as I'm maturing and getting, I don't, sounds patronizing that, but I'm getting older basically. And as I get older, the energy shifts, and you don't want something that's full on headbanging kind of. Believe me, I've been into very heavy music in the past, sort of Nine Inch Nails and Soundgarden and other things. But these days, it tends to be just creating an ambience, just a nice kind of calm feel, just to get my thoughts flowing a bit more. But sometimes, yeah, even now, I think that the heavier, more upbeat music can be useful. And I think that's probably more useful once I've started a project. I think if I'm underway in a project, and it gives me energy to then work through it. But I think if initially in the early stages, I like something a little bit calmer. I think that works better for me.
I
I
think
forgot what the
music is
question was
just
now, but
subjective, though, isn't it? Of like
yeah, of course.
what causes emotion in you? What causes emotion? I think that's just the simplest way of
Mm,
saying it. It's just what causes emotion in you that gives you energy. Music can be very
mm,
energizing as well. So yeah, everybody's is different, and that's one point that we're going to say here, is that everybody's processes here will be different. We're just trying to sort of give you a few ideas to next time you hit that block, go through your checklist. Like, think about yourself.
mm,
One thing that's really important is just to walk away. Like, we are in very different situations where, as I mentioned earlier, there is a time clicking in the background. We've got
yeah.
to think about getting something ready for the week, and the luxury of that, and it is a luxury of being able to just walk away. I do it, but not for prolonged periods. If that day is
Mm.
just not flowing how you want to, just walk away. Whether
And
you need
I
to,
think that's what I was thinking about before. It depends what stage you are in your life too. It's like if you're an art student, you've got typically a lot more time in your day to really invest and dig deep into your soul and try and figure out what your direction is, and you've got all this enthusiasm, but you don't know where to put it and where to channel it, then that's a different kind of um, creative block and a different position to be in than someone's who's on a treadmill and has to produce to a deadline.
It's
It's
very
a
true.
slightly different. It's a quite a different place to be in, and it can be a real crisis of confidence, I think, for the former when you're a younger artist and you haven't found your feet yet, and you don't know quite where you are as an artist, and you're looking for that creative style. And obviously, that relates back to a previous episode that we've done. Um, but I think once you have matured, or you've got a career, or you found your style, then I think creative block typically comes a little bit less because you've found whatever works for you. But it still happens, and
Yeah.
it happens when you've got a deadline and when you're exhausted already, and you've not left an appropriate amount of time left in your week, which is usually me by the weekend. Um, we work very differently as YouTubers. I know. I think you're a lot more organized than I am. Um, I tend to be by the seat of my pants a little bit, and it tends to be the last moment that I'm producing my content. Um, but then that's the way that it works for me. So everyone's different, aren't they? But
Yeah, I think process is probably another thing to talk about, really,
mm,
especially for us. We'll definitely make that a future episode for sure in terms of our differences, because I think it's interesting for people to know, how we go about a process, but also that there's not just the route for it. And it's the same with this
no,
topic as a whole, isn't it? There is not one route for it. You can find whatever works for you, whether it's just getting out on your kayak and going, kayaking for an hour and coming back, having
mm,
been on the sea, and maybe that's enough for you. Or you know I, I'm very fortunate that we have such amazing sort of spots around here, that those days are the ones that charge me the most, and seeing friends as well. Like, friends can give you
sure.
so much energy that when you come back home, you are just pumped full of just happiness in a way that you can just, crack on with your work. There's nothing negative in your way that week, maybe. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of, like, maybe soul searching as well, maybe, to go into it. But, certain elements to your
Yeah.
life. Is there anything externally that's blocking you? Like you said, I think there's two very different scenarios, isn't there? There's like
Mm.
someone with a deadline that almost maybe has a little bit of a stress on top, and then there's people that just have so much energy to give but don't know how to apply it.
And I think probably from our perspective, we are very much locked into that we've got deadlines. But I imagine that a lot of people maybe listening to this might be viewing their art as something they do for fun, might be
Mm,
more of a hobby based thing, or perhaps they, looking to build up an art career, but they're still at the stages where they struggle to know where to channel that energy. And I think probably in terms of speaking to that, I think that it's important to just make sure that you do some kind of work regularly. And this goes back to the finding your style video conversation that we had. And I think that the practice of just making a time in your day where you get a sketchbook out and a pencil out, or you get the iPad open and you start doodling or working, I think is an important step in the process to overcoming creative block. Because I think trying to already have a fixed idea of what it is you want to create is often the problem. I think that we think that other artists that have come up with things have, I don't know, hatched an idea in their imagination, then it's translated straight to the canvas,
yeah.
and that's not the process that I've found for me. I don't know about yourself, but it's a continual exploration of shape and form and texture and color and light and all of these qualities. And if you don't know what to do next creatively as an artist, I think that it's as well to do anything. It doesn't actually matter to get past that stagnant point where you're not doing anything. And this is the problem with creative block. I think the biggest problem is that it's paralyzing, and it stops you doing anything.
Mm,
And that's the most vicious side of it, is that you've got all the best intentions and the will to create something, but you just don't know where to start to get past this feeling of that whatever you do is going to be wrong, and you don't know how to quite get to the place that you know you want to. Um, and I do think a regular practice of just getting materials out and producing something, even
yeah.
if it is just sketching and doodling. And something through that process will inspire you. There'll be a little kernel, a nugget of a creative idea that you can then grow into something bigger, I think, if you continue to do that.
Yeah, I think that one thing I've learned a lot from recently, I've alluded to it before about my doodle challenge that I do on my Discord. Um, th- there isn't. I think a lot of people in our audience typically join the space by doing tutorials, following tutors on a weekly basis, and then go like that, and then try to venture off and do their own work, which is absolutely part and parcel of this whole world. But there are other mediums to the space that I think should be explored and understood a little bit more in terms of I mention this because I get a lot of really positive feedback from it, because I provide a doodle. It quite literally will be a squiggle on the screen, and I say to people, download that now. You've got a week before we move on to the next one, and when you download it, you can rotate it, you can scale it up and down, you can maybe duplicate it. But what do you see that doodle? And I think that's really again a medium that I think people should just maybe try and explore a little bit. I'm not trying to plug my doodle. That's not what I'm trying to get at. But I think it's really important for people to know that there are other challenges. If you want to feel like you're part of a community and doing something. A lot of our audience, as I said, it's like a weekly thing, isn't it? New tutorial every week. I complete it, move on, and wait for the next one. But there are other things that also in your week that are like regular things that you could keep up with, like a doodle challenge. There's one in the Procreate beginners group on Facebook. They do shape of the week, and you download it, upload it in the comments of what you see. And again, I've had so many positive comments back of just being like, this has given me a lease of creativity that I didn't know I had. And it's allowing me to be creative beyond just following a tutorial. They both have their benefits. You'll learn things from tutorials, but then being able to somewhat say to yourself, what have I learned in the last, I don't know, year that I've been doing Procreate? All of these things I've picked up from tutorials. Let me put it into practice, highlighting, shadows, all these types of things. And I can guarantee you will shock yourself at what you see and what you can come up with. And no pressure on it either. It's just a simple challenge, so you can do as little or as much as you want.
Yeah, I think that specifically the act of doodling is really important. I think that it's getting back. We've said it before, I know. It's getting back to that play aspect of art where you lose the expectations of an end product. And it could be you take somebody else's very simple shape and you adapt and amend that, but you can create simple shapes yourself. I spent several years just exploring shapes and doodles, and the word doodle has a kind of bad rep, really. It's kind of seen as something you do while you're distracted, and it's not a serious art kind of pursuit. But I don't see why it has to be seen that way. I think that for me, the kind of pursuit of doodles and playing around with shapes has produced my favorite work. I mean, I do a lot of landscape stuff on Procreate for YouTube tutorials, but when I'm just doing art for its own sake, for the fun of it, the stuff that I really enjoy is in its essence more abstract, and it is just exploring shapes and pulling and pushing forms around, and then starting to think, well, how could I put some light on it? What textures could I put on it, and all those other aspects. But I think just the act of creating shapes and seeing what emerges in front of you, and it might be you don't like it, but that's fine. But if you keep doing it, you will find things that inspire you. I think it doesn't have to be pursuit of a finished outcome. I think that you'll get there no matter what you start with, and like in your challenges, it could just be a simple squiggle.
I think I want to come back to the creative block a little bit, because I actually want to dig a little into maybe giving insight into the fact that you've been doing this now, nearly, I can't remember how long the Procreate tutorial was, but the channel has been up for at least like 8 or 9 years, right?
Yeah,
that's a very good window of experience. I want to sort of simplify it as a simple question to say, can you remember a significant moment in the time or the journey that you've been doing this that you were at your most sort of blocked with creativity?
Yeah, I think over the years there's been various points. There's been lulls at certain points, and it's more to do with the success and the journey of as a YouTuber rather than the creative content. Having said that, when I've really just focused in on what it is that I like to do rather than trying to chase views, um, I've found that my videos probably will do better in that instance anyway. Not completely. I mean, to a certain point, I have to separate me as an artist and me as a YouTuber. But when I'm genuinely enthusiastic about something, it tends to do a little bit better anyway. So it comes down to exploring and finding things that you do find inspiring, things that you gravitate towards more and more, and not being afraid to just allow your natural inclinations and interests in art to guide you a little bit.
Mm.
Um, I think we can resist and fight the flow, the state of mind that really helps us be creative. And we have this ambition to think, oh, well, I need to be this person or I need to be that artist. And I think sometimes just allowing the process to kind of dictate to you where you're going to go. I think sometimes the art can tell you more than you can tell it. You have an intention. With every single piece of work that I've ever executed, the outcome is always different than my intentions.
Mm.
It might be 80% of what I intended, but that extra or that 20% difference sometimes can be the most interesting part of what I create. And sometimes it's the discoveries and the process and the journey that really can guide you as to what you can do next. And I think that in terms of going back to the creative flow, I think once you've got that momentum, once you are moving forwards creatively, then the next idea will come to you and it will inform the next thing, which will inform the next thing. I think the worst thing to do is to overanalyze. Um, is it analysis paralysis? Is a common thing, and I think
Mm.
that us as artists and creative people really do suffer from that quite a lot. And I think as long as you are creating, it will spur on something else. And yeah, it doesn't always go perfect every day. Sometimes you'll try something and you think, oh, rubbish, and you need to go and get some sleep and step away from it, like you said, go for a walk, clear your mind. But I think even then, I think even when you stumble and you struggle with something, it teaches you where not to go, what
Mm.
isn't working, which may nudge you in a slightly different direction towards the things that ultimately you will be happier with.
Yeah. For me, I've been doing this now 3.5 years, I think it is. And um, there was one moment last year. So I set up a second channel, which was designed for tutorials for cross-platform apps. So hitting the sort of Android and iOS user base, but in apps away from Procreate. So I left my main channel
Mm,
as just Procreate. When I started that channel, I was probably about a dozen, if not more, tutorials down, and I was I was so burnt out, and
mm,
it was a workflow, or just the amount of content that I knew I had to make was just the heaviest weight I felt on my shoulders doing any of this, in terms of just sheer like demand of me and just requirements of like every week. Like the days that you're not feeling it, it I didn't even have the time at that point to realize, like, to step away or do anything that would
mm.
aid the process. It was just a consistent weight on me, and I just couldn't do it. At that point, I had enough. I had to put that channel on pause for like 6 months and just come back to it
Yeah.
with a different mindset, to the point where I was like, listen, tutorials might not be weekly, but there will be, maybe once every 2 weeks or maybe once a month, but it will be when I can. And I explained it to the community over there, and they were really, positive and stuff. But that's the one moment where, in this whole thing, that when you think sometimes of creative block, I think of my mind as just a jar, and there was nothing. I
Mm,
mean, nothing. Like the lid, it was empty, and the lid had been glued shut. Like there was no way of me fixing it. It was really tough, and so that was probably the only moment, but the biggest moment, should I say, of like real, almost like burnout of it, which is a step beyond what we've essentially spoken about. But creatively, it really took its toll on me, where I just couldn't keep doing it anymore. Whereas now, bizarrely, it's almost like this like evolving thing. I'm someone who
mm,
loves to look at as you're going through, like every journey that you're on is like looking at yourself and reflecting just even just a month ago or a little bit before that and a bit further back again, of just understanding how you're evolving as a person and how much you're changing, whether it's better for the worse, but hopefully for the better, and learning how much you can take on. For now, when I look at how much content I make now, last year doesn't make any sense anymore, but that evolving of understanding your process of like, and I'm trying to somewhat relate it. I'm trying to give like a personal kind of story here, but then also try and then bring it back to say, take a look at your workload. Are you putting too much on yourself, and that's why you're creatively blocked? And is it necessary to be doing all of those things? As you mentioned, you should try and draw a bit, but you don't have to create 5 or 6 designs. I know there's people in this Procreate community that churn out like everybody's tutorial every Saturday, every Sunday. And they obviously have a lot of time on the weekends for it, and it's their love and it's their passion. And I totally get that. But, that level of turnout must be exhausting. And I just hope that wouldn't then tire you out so much that you then don't want to do it next time. So, yeah, I think workload is quite an interesting thing to also look at.
I think, yeah, workload is always an issue. I think when you have to do something, it changes the dynamic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you're doing it through choice or feeling that you absolutely have to do it to pay bills or whatever, it does change it. Sometimes the worst thing that you can do is turn something you love into a career. But we struggle with that as individuals ourselves. But yeah, I think if you're just doing art for the enjoyment's sake, I think a lot of the other aspects that we've spoken about come into play quite a lot with that. Just creating the nice space in order to do that. Another aspect is to change up your approach and to try different things. We say go back to basics, but it might be for us who are traditional digital artists, then switching it up and trying something traditional. I know that for me personally, the last few weeks I've been doing traditional work, and I've been really enjoying the change and the difference of returning back to doing some traditional work. I will always do both. I'm not fundamentally changing as an artist, but it's been really refreshing to just try something different, and it's really got my creativity going again. And by the time I return to doing a digital tutorial at the end of the week, or I shouldn't do, but yeah, I do it at the end of the week. I found that I've had positive experiences with creativity, and if it's even just in the abstract sense of playing around with shapes and colors, because I'm coming at it with a positive vibe, it's influencing what I then do in my other work. So I think, like you say, if the cup is full of negative thoughts, and you're finding it impossible to replace all that negativity with a positive for the task at hand, I think trying something similar but different might actually just pour some positivity into that cup a little bit more as well. And so you've got more of it when you go to address the other tasks that you need to do. And just a break and just a change of a pace and a different way of approaching things can just allow you to return to the task in a different frame of mind.
Yeah,
Personally,
I
I
mean,
think that's been really good for me.
you say about positivity. The second you said that, I was literally thinking, just be kind to yourself as well. Don't
Yeah.
put demand on yourself if there's no demand required. Be kind to yourself. You don't need to don't put yourself in that position. Let's put it that way. Be kind to yourself in a sense that you can allow a day where, okay, I'm going to step away and come back. And like I say, maybe do something different. Go to Hobbycraft. Go grab some, resources and, brushes and paints or whatever you want to do, and just chuck color at a canvas. Do something that's fun for you. And again, be kind to yourself. One thing I do want to touch on, unless you've got anything else on that particular point.
No, I think we
No?
may well. We're inevitably going to return to similar themes in the future, anyway, aren't we? But I think we've covered quite a lot of ground just in that.
Do
In
you
that
know what I
chat
find really
already.
interesting though? Is every topic that we cover, there's like almost fundamentals, isn't there, that cross over all the different topics. You said multiple times in there about how finding your art style and the process of doing that. That can really feed into creative block as well, because
Yeah,
you can
definitely.
end up going, like you say, just you. In that video, we spoke about how using different brushes and colors and textures and stuff like that, just try something different in Procreate. If you're somebody who sticks with a certain, regime of brushes and won't, step out of that, I urge you to do so. I urge you to just use a different brush, because the effects and the styles, I don't think there's a more pleasing moment in Procreate and in most digital art, but also traditional art, of you use a tool and you go, wait a minute. And then that just takes you on a tangent, and you just run with it. That is one of the most satisfying moments, especially if you can pick up on it as you're doing it. That, wait a second, this is I've got an idea now. Try and find that moment by just experimenting and messing around with different topics.
Yeah. And taking the pressure off yourself, like you say, it's 100%. Important, that.
Now, one topic that somewhat leads into that, and it's a viewer submitted question, which I believe, to be honest, is quite related to that in terms of being kind and taking pressure off yourself. We had a question, and if you want to submit a question for the show, there is a link in the description down below. We'll do our best to cover the majority. Some of them we've already covered, so that's why we haven't talked about them just yet. Jen has submitted a question to the show, and I'm just going to read it here. What do you guys think about tracing? As a disabled artist, I recently discovered it really helps me to get accurate proportions, etc. Although I always add my own touch when using colors and brushes. Love both your guys' content. Lots of heart emojis. Well, Jen, I appreciate the question and the love. James, what do you think about tracing?
I think that if the tracing is like 90% or more of the image, then yeah, I think that you're selling yourself short on the opportunity to learn. But if it's a small component of a larger piece, and there's large elements in there that you've genuinely explored based on your own, ability and exploration, I think there's nothing wrong with using something as a platform to jump off from. And I think we've all at certain times, like, for example, if you had a design that needed a perfect circle in it, well, then you'd find a template of a circle and you'd trace it in one form or another. And we'd all rely upon the tools, and we'd all use tracing as a means to an end. And I certainly think that if you're tracing something that you've already created as well, I know that's not the question, but I certainly would trace my own drawings. If I've created something in a design, a sketch, and I want to then progress it further, I'm not going to redraw it. I would use tracing to do that. But yeah, I think if it's just a leg up and an assistance to get to the point where you are really exploring and really learning, then I don't see a problem with it. How about you?
I think the one thing I would say is directly to Jen. So if you're talking just to you, it doesn't matter. None of this matters in that sense.
No, not really.
Do what you love. Do what makes you happy. As you mentioned there, you said there, as a disabled artist, first of all, we can't gauge, first of all, from the message what type of tracing you're doing. Like James said, is it 90% of an image? Is it just literally getting started? Also, we're not too sure about your disability. And so we're not too sure about, in terms of the specifics that would hinder your drawing experience potentially. But again, if it makes it more comfortable for you, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. No. Do what makes life better for you. If you're still enjoying the process, like you said, you're adding your own touches, using colors and brushes afterwards, that's perfectly fine. I think the thing to consider is what are you tracing for a start? Are you tracing something of a design, maybe say hypothetically of one of our tutorials? Then, I would try to, over time, build up the confidence to maybe tackle it. But again, you mentioned about disability, which is a critical factor in this. So, again, do whatever is most comfortable for you. I don't think it's necessarily it's not tracing. I know it's not. One thing you can try and elevate your sort of confidence with tracing is, if you want to take it to the next level, but you don't want to jump straight ship to just creating shapes, do the grid method. So what I do is, let's say typically you've got a 2000 by 2000 canvas. That's a lot of the time my canvas size. Double the width. So go 2000 by 4000. So get the width. Set a grid that gives you 8 across the top and 4 down the side. So you've got a 4x4 grid on either side. Put the image that you want to trace on the left-hand side in that 4x4, and then make sure there's a clean break in the middle, and then use the grid on the right-hand side. So what you do with the grid system is, you look at the first tile, and I've done this with my bird paintings, because I think certain elements of nature and real life are quite hard to implement, and I think it's a really vital stepping stone, these kind of grid systems, to get the confidence to just go next time straight to shapes and straight to canvas.
Sometimes the formula isn't enough either. There's no way of boiling it down to one formula that will work every time. So sometimes it's a specific angle that you need to try and recreate, isn't it? So the grid method is really useful for that.
So the grid, you're looking at the first tile. Let's just say it's a bird. You're looking at where the head comes, at the top of does it come midway through on the right-hand side? And then does it leave the the square in that grid at the bottom, say 2/3 across? You just need to draw your curve across and align it to those points. And then when you're done, drag your trace or your sketch over the top of the image and see where you need to make adjustments or fix. And if you want to, at that point, you can make a decision and say, do I want to adjust this and trace it just now I've laid it back on top? Do I just want to trace it and that's it? Or do I want to give it another go and try and learn from the previous time and build up that confidence and understanding of, like, again, shapes leaving each one of those tiles? There's a very good method. And I'm trying to really put my mind in your mindset, Jen, here, of like what it is you're doing. I think it comes down to my initial comment, to be honest, of really, if it makes life easier for you, then just do what's easier for you, whatever makes life more comfortable. I think if you can look at a design and be honest with yourself and say, I did more than enough of this design, that the initial trace just to get going, was simply just to get me going on the design, then that's perfectly fine. But be honest with yourself and be sort of responsible and try to, make sure you're adding something of value from yourself in your own mind onto canvas. What do you think?
Yeah, I think another aspect to this is I feel that as long as you are stretching yourself with every task that you do in some way, so it might be that you've traced the forms and the shapes, but then you are freehand practicing the shading and the textures and the colors. Well, that's fine. You've been focusing on that for that particular task. Now, if there are certain artists like Salvador Dali, I know it's known that he would use overhead projectors and actually project his images onto his canvas, and because he was very capable already, and it would be just used as a time-saving device. But I think as long as you are stretching yourself and you're trying to do things as much as possible, it can just be a scaffolding to get you to a more confident place. And there is, I think, the camera obscura, I think, where the image would be projected. Have you heard of this, or is it the pinhole camera, or one of the two? Where it was found that a lot of the kind of traditional paintings, I think there's a lot of Dutch paintings, suddenly evolved in the art history kind of realm, where it went from being, artists struggling, and then suddenly they went super photographic because of a technological advance in which they were able to project onto the canvas and sort of trace around it. But even having said that, even when they know, or they've got the advantage of using the technology to give them the basic outlines and the shapes, they would still need to learn how to apply the paint, how to apply the colors, how to do the right textures and create the right effect. I think that even when you have achieved a high level of skill and you can do it completely without assistance, you're kind of silly to not use some of the tools that you to hand to actually make it more efficient. But I think, yeah, as long as you are learning and as long as you are pushing yourself in some aspect with each piece, I think it's absolutely fine. I think do whatever you need to in order to help progress yourself as an artist. And it may be that years down the line that, okay, you've traced for a certain length of time and then suddenly you feel confident that you don't need to do as much of that anymore. Or you
Yeah,
do, you choose to do it just because it's quicker.
that's true. I mean, there's also tutorials of mine where I provide, I stencil guides, and even for
Yeah,
certain
yeah, of
elements that are
course.
fairly straightforward, because in my mind, it's almost like I want to get someone to the point that maybe the basic shapes are done, because that's not what the exercise is about.
That's the boring bit.
I gave one recently just for an apple. I didn't want to use the grid system that I normally use in other tutorials, even the one not necessarily side by side, but sometimes most tutorials I'll put a grid on there so people can lay out their design. Sometimes I don't want to do that. I just want to listen, let's just put the basic shape of an apple in. That's not the exercise. The exercise is the application and layering and highlighting and shadows of the apple, as well as applying what was a painting aesthetic to it as well. So, don't get me wrong, like I will provide what is essentially stencil traces of my own work for other people, but that's not the point. The point is that guide does not sort of get you to the finish line. You've just got to step over it. There's a lot of work involved to get to that finishing line, and there's different processes, isn't there, like we said. So stencil guides sometimes part of my process.
Some people are very purist as well. Some people say you shouldn't have references, you shouldn't use stencils, you shouldn't use the grid system. And some people are very purist about it, and life's too short, isn't it?
I had to bite my tongue when you said that. I had to bite my tongue. I'm sorry. I hate gatekeepers. It drives me nuts, because I get it. Like, you're at a certain level, you're at a certain skill, but other people are not. There are many times in my journey of doing this where I've provided a stencil guide and I've had comments of people saying, why are we still getting these? Why? Or maybe it was a stamp brush in the very early days, like especially the stencil guides. You can't just chill out. Let other people enjoy their day. Let other people just take a little bit of weight off, because again, that's not the exercise. Just because you can draw that perfectly fine doesn't mean someone else can. And I'm looking at you straight down camera now. If you're that qualified, don't use the guide. Just get on with it. Do it yourself. Draw it yourself. Don't use the guide if they're provided. There you go.
Well,
that's my little rant for the day. Or don't watch. Unsubscribe and go away. No, don't. Stay.
Don't do that. No,
James, appreciate you as always for an awesome conversation.
Thank you.
Guys, thank you for all of the support on the channel. We've had loads of comments and love. If you're not subscribed here, though, please make sure you subscribe to the show. And if you want to, you can come and join us over on the socials as well. There's links to everything in the description down below. And like I said, during the show, if you want to submit a question as well, there's a link to the form down below. We will see you again next Tuesday for another episode of the Sketch Wave. We'll see you later.